Twilight hadn't realized that she was running at a near full gallop towards Fluttershy's house until her injured shoulder began to ache. She slowed her pace, knowing for certain that she was out of the dragon's reach. For now. Well, she thought after a moment or two of consideration, I think it's a given at this point that nothing's really certain. She swiveled her ears around, checking for noise behind herself as she walked. Well, I don't hear his roar anymore. I should be okay, at least for now. The fog seemed to grow thicker as she approached the edges of Ponyville. She was heading towards the bridge that crossed the stream on the way to her friend's new home. But the mist was so impermeable that she couldn't see it until she had literally almost fallen into it. She took a sharp inhale and backed up a few steps from the edge of the chasm. But where's the bridge? She wondered, glancing at the path beneath her hooves. It should be right on the trail. Oh, my dear Twilight. A voice sounded to her left. She snapped her attention to the cloaked pony that had somehow snuck up on her without realization. What a surprise! She exclaimed joyfully. What do you want? Twilight growled, her eyes blazing with a mixture of suspicion and hostility. The mysterious mare seemed hurt. Nothing but to say that the fact that you're alive is very pleasing to my eyes. This world has claimed so many a soul. I'm grateful to see that you're still in control. Twilight realized what she had just said, and she hung her head slightly, letting her nerves settle. I'm sorry for snapping at you. This place has me on edge. I'm not supposed to trust any pony anymore. Not while I'm here, at least. She nodded. Trust is a danger you'd do well to erase. The truth only harms in this deadly place. Do take care, though, not to dismiss it outright. Lies won't help you in your final fight. Twilight threw up her head in exasperation. Kill things. Don't kill things. Stay in one place and get killed. Explore and get killed. Listen to the truth. Hide from the truth. This is all so... She tried, but couldn't seem to find the words to get her frustration out. I believe the word you're looking for is aggravating, the mayor suggested. Twilight nodded sadly. Not to mention completely and utterly horrifying. Fear is an emotion most irritating. It's designed to keep us from trouble, but in situations it causes danger to double. Here is a poor, poor way of keeping danger at bay. Monsters will find you, regardless of what you feel, and what little you suppress. The mayor stated ominously. Yes, everything is based on fear. Well, I guess, Twilight said with a shrug. Are you actually going to tell me anything, or are you just going to follow me around? At this point, I'd probably be fine with either, she added to herself miserably. The mayor laughed. I see. You want help as your journey worsens. I'm sorry to say there is no way for me to share your burden, though I do wish to see you through this alive. I'm afraid that no assistance can I contrive. Twilight rolled her eyes, despite the fact she had expected this sort of answer. Whatever then. See you later. She was about to walk off when the mayor spoke again. I have one thing to say. One last thing that is true. Nothing is real if it doesn't hurt you. Twilight turned to face her, but she had vanished into the fog. Listening for hoof steps, wondering why she would have run away so quickly. But no sound met her ears. It was as silent as a graveyard, and Twilight felt utterly lonesome once again. She continued on her way, this time seeing that the broken bridge had once more impeded her progress, was now patched up haphazardly, with large, recently uprooted trees linking the two edges of the river, and making it possible to cross. Assuming that her talk with the mayor that may or may not have been a mirage had something to do with it, she carefully crossed the slippery wood and continued on her way. The trek to Fluttershy's cottage after that was thankfully didn't last much longer. However, when she reached the small cottage where her two friends stayed, she found it in the same amount of disrepair as the rest of Ponyville. Part of the roof had caved in, the windows were boarded, and there was a large padlock and chain on the front and only door. Twilight covered her nose as she inhaled a waft of decay. I am definitely not looking forward to whatever's in there. The more she thought about it, though, the more she noticed that the horrible conditions and terrifying abbreviations were becoming almost commonplace. It was a thought that unsettled her, so she put it aside. Not even bothering to try the door, she searched the perimeter of the house and found 3 statues off to the side behind the pile of rubble that used to be the roof. They were all made of dull gray stone, and there was a wooden podium in the middle of the 3. Twilight examined each statue in turn. The first depicted a unicorn mare with spears sent clean through her eyes, piercing through the back of her head. She looked as if she were screaming with surprise and agony. The attack was sudden, unexpected, almost as if she had been betrayed. The base of the statue was labeled Truth. The second statue was a Pegasus, though it was more of a bust, only showing the torso and the forelegs, with its hind legs presumably in the pedestal that supported it. And this one had a pole that had been pierced through one ear, protruding from the other. This one seemed as if it were executed, and its face was limp, expressionless, as was the rest of its body, hanging from the pole that had been stabbed with. The base of the statue was labeled Lies. The third statue was of an earth pony stallion, though this one was laying face down, hunched over a sword that had been stabbed through his mouth and up through his skull. His now limp hooves seemed like they had once clutched the sword, leading to the assumption that the stallion's death was at his own hooves, his own responsibility. The base of the statue was labeled Secrets. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, Twilight muttered, addressing each of the statues in turn. Sparing them only a glance, she carefully approached the podium. On it was a single poem, written in an ancient parchment. Blighted are the ones that stay, lighted are the paths away. I can't tell you what to say. No one keeps you in this fray. Doom is quickly on its way, eager to come out and play. Death's favorite color is gray. Twilight studied it for a moment, trying to pull some meaning from it. Well, I guess I shouldn't really have expected it to make all that much sense on its own, she thought. She bent over, looking at every side of the podium before tapping it lightly. There was an echo. That means it's hollow, she realized. After gently placing the piece of paper and placing it into her magic, she turned and slammed her hind hooves on the wooden stand, mimicking her friend Applejack. The podium splintered, revealing a heavy sledgehammer that was once hidden inside. She examined the sledgehammer, contemplating whether or not she could wield something so hefty, or even carry it with her. Every little thing you keep puts more strain on your magic, she internally recited, remembering the spell's instructions. Eventually, she did decide to place it into her magic pocket, knowing that it would likely prove more useful in the future. She immediately noticed the weight, though, that the hammer placed upon her, almost as if she had gained 20 pounds in an instant. Ugh, she mumbled, shaking her head. I guess I'm reaching my limit. I hope I find a lighter weapon soon. Otherwise, just lugging this thing around could drain me completely. After she had steadied herself, she took the poem out of her magic and set it on the ground, studying it. After a few moments of thought, though, the dragon's distant roar reverberated across the foggy landscape. The deathly noise made her jump nearly 10 meters into the air. Deep breaths, Twilight, she told herself, trying to calm her nerves. She considered trying the sledgehammer on the door, but she decided against it, at least for the time being. If I do solve this puzzle, I don't want anything coming in after me. She started the parchment again. Okay, so if the last word puzzle had anything to do with letters, then this one probably does too. She studied the poem for a moment, before realizing that each capitalization of the letters, when put together, spelled blinded. It's just a simple acrostic, she thought. She glanced back at the statues. I guess it's pretty obvious what I have to do next. She went over to the statue with the mare, who was having her eyes gouged out, removed the sledgehammer from her magic, before gently tapping the blunt metal head of her multi-purpose tool on the stone. A crack formed that quickly spread down the statue between the eyes of the mare, and in a few moments the statue had silently crumbled to dust. Twilight shifted through the rubble, searching for anything relevant, before finding a note. The door is unlocked. She blinked in disbelief before galloping to Fluttershy's front door. It was still in chains, as she suspected, with a giant padlock in the center hanging in a solemn gatekeeper. Just as a test, though, she nudged the door with a hoof, though only faintly. The rusty chain crumbled, with the padlock falling and shattering on the ground. Twilight nearly lost it. "Oh, come on!" She clapped a hoof over her mouth. But before her aggravated outburst echoed, not once, not twice, but 3 times across the silent Ponyville. The dragon roared again, though this time Twilight knew it couldn't have been more than a kilometer away. She nearly saw its silhouette reflected in the fog. Bursting into a full-fledged panic, Twilight grabbed the hammer, shoved it into her portable hole, and ran into the cottage and shut the door as silently as possible behind her. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and she was shaking as she slowly sank to the ground, pressing herself into the wall next to the door. She didn't dare to move. The dragon's footsteps sent shockwaves through the ground, causing the floor to tremble nearly as much as Twilight was. She heard it hiss and smell the air for her, slowly pacing around the house as if it was the very place it had lost her scent. Twilight steeled herself and froze in place, not wanting to give it any more opportunities to find her than it already had. She was hoping against hope that it would not destroy the cottage looking for her. Eventually, though, in defiance of all rhyme and reason, she heard the slow flap of its heavy wings as it sailed away. To it must have been as though a cottage didn't even exist, though the only explanation she could think of. Dragons, as she knew from raising Spike, had excellent senses. There was no reason for her to have gotten so lucky more than once. "No pony escapes dragons," she breathed. "At least, I'm not the only one getting tricked by this place." Standing up, she felt a burst of rage as she remembered the complete pointlessness of that puzzle, knowing that this place was only toying with her now, messing with her head. But she thought for a few moments. I guess it wasn't all for nothing. I did get a hammer. She pondered what the mayor had said to her earlier. Nothing is real if it doesn't hurt you. Did that mean that the dragon was only an illusion, since it hadn't injured her? She realized that she didn't actually see a dragon at any point in the past few hours, that she had only heard one and seen a shape in the fog resembling a dragon. But she had seen one in crisp detail near the beginning of her journey. Swallowing, she decided best not to touch that theory. After she had fully gathered her nerves, she began to examine her surroundings, using the pendant around her neck to provide a faint, flickering light. Fluttershy's cottage was a wreck, but that was to be expected. Broken, moldy furniture littered the floor, the wallpaper was peeling, and the stench of mildew permeated the small house. Twilight didn't want to push her luck by calling out for her 2 friends. If this place is anything like the rest of Ponyville, then they've both vanished. No use alerting the dragon by yelling for them. If they're here, I'll find them soon enough anyway. That in mind, she began to explore the kitchen. It was filled with various tubes and scientific equipment, all of which was completely corrupted and contaminated, with all sorts of gunk that looked as though it had once been food. The counters were filled with vials and jars of the stuff. Tubes wound their way through the air, connecting various different putrid vessels. Twilight's stomach did a flip at the smell, compelling her to quickly duck under the tubes and remove herself from the horrifying lab. The living room was much more bearable, showing only the ordinary signs of decrepitness. As she poked through the furniture, though, Twilight noticed an odd cylindrical hole in the ground, just wide enough for a single pony hoof to fit through. She carefully peered down into it. At the very bottom of the small pocket, there appeared to be a button, with a steady drip of water coming from the rim of the tiny pit. Twilight was about to reach in and press it, but she hesitated for a moment. Instead, just to be safe, she dragged a limb from one of the broken chairs and poked it down the hole, aiming for the button. As she suspected, the stick hit the flash instantly in the device, and she watched in slight intrigue as the chair leg slowly disappeared down into the small crevice, and she heard something gouge itself on the wood. She glanced down it again and saw a small, many-toothed, worm-like animal just finishing its meal before crawling back into the base of its lair. The slow drip started again, though this time, Twilight knew it was not saliva. Or it was saliva, not water. I guess I just have to kill it, Twilight told herself, sighing. She ambled back into the kitchen and held her breath as she looked for anything possibly toxic. Eventually, something did jump out at her. A beaker filled with a substance that looked far too ordinary to be in the twisted laboratory. She levitated the covered beaker of a clear liquid out of the kitchen and set it down on the three-legged coffee table. Removing the cap, she took a small whiff of what it contained. An intense burning flared in her nostrils for a moment, but she did manage to recognize the incredibly strong chlorine smell that was hydrochloric acid, likely in high concentration. She cautiously glanced back at the hole in the living room. This isn't what I want to do, she reminded herself. I just don't have any more options. Exercising extreme patience in the presence of such strong acids, Twilight levitated the beaker into the hole and slowly lowered it until she felt the worm's mouth wrap around the edges. There was a crunch of glass, a hissing of flesh, and finally silence as the small monster liquefied. I'm sorry, little guy, Twilight found herself saying, and she genuinely felt it. Something in the air had motivated her to press that button, and she had to get to it, no matter what. Her life could be on the line. To her, it seemed like it always was. After she was sure it was dead, she retrieved another limb of the broken armchair and levitated it down to the small hole. She heard a small click as she pressed the buttons, and for a few moments nothing happened. Then, Twilight heard the creaking of floorboards and the splintering of wood. The house began to shake in ever-increasing volume and violence, and Twilight struggled to stay on her hooves. Broken picture frames fell from the walls and shattered. Tables turned on their sides, and cabinets crashed to the ground. As quickly as it had started, though, the tremors vanished. Twilight paused, the silence so absolute that she was unsure whether or not she was still alive. A terrible, rending siren snapped her to her senses. It was a low wail that seemed to emanate from just above Fluttershy's cottage. It was the same one she had heard before, and it was not, by any stretch of imagination, a good sign. Twilight braced herself, but nothing happened. She paused, looking around. Despite the increased amount of rubble lying around the house, nothing seemed to have changed. She took a cautious step towards the kitchen. The wooden plank snapped under her weight, and she fell into an infinite abyss. She woke up in what looked like a strange world that had a couple of times before, the other world where she had fought the broken alicorn. Wiping liquid from her eyes, she examined her surroundings and tried to hold her breath. The room she was in looked something like that of a newborn's, though with everything else in this hellish dimension, it was crooked and disgusting. What remained of the shattered crib was lying in a smoldering pile on the ground. Smoke softly rose to the top of the blackened bedchamber, and as Twilight glanced upward to follow the gray trail, she saw various dolls hanging from the ceiling. Some of them were made of rags, others from porcelain, but they all shared one defining characteristic. They were hanging from their necks. Twilight whiffed the metallic tang of blood once more, but she glanced at her hoof to see in horror that it was stained red. She blinked as more of her own blood gushed onto her forehead and down her eyes, and she gasped in horror as she saw her horn lying in front of her, snapped off at its base. She must have landed on it when she fell. Instinctively, she tried to pick it up using telekinesis, but a splitting pain carved through her skull. It was like being split open by a cleaver. Her broken horn didn't move an inch. She felt herself tearing up, but not from the pain. This was it. It was over. Without her magic, she couldn't fend for herself. She didn't even have a weapon that wasn't trapped inside of her portable hole. She realized in a panic that perhaps the hole had collapsed, leaving its contents to dissolve in the netherworld, in which it was created, but was reassured when she felt a burden pressing down on her. She inhaled sharply again as she remembered that, since she couldn't open it anymore, that everything inside was now only dead weight. Twilight shook her head violently, spraying a few drops of the clotting blood to the left and right. No, now's not the time to panic, she told herself. She absolutely noted that the wound didn't hurt on its own. It only pained her when she tried to use her magic. Does that mean that it's not real? If it doesn't hurt? There are other ways to disable magic, and I don't know if this world's real or not, either. Then again, I don't know if what that mare said is true or not. She sighed in exasperation. I'm not dead yet, she reminded herself softly, staring at her horn. I need to keep going. It can't get any worse, at least. She mumbled glumly. She knew that resigning herself to death would be pointless. The only option was forward. She glanced back up at the hanging dolls, searching for anything that might clue her in as to the nature of this other world. An eerie wail began to emanate from the ceiling. That of a foal begging for help, but other than that, nothing. Twilight's ears perked up, and she quickly turned around, but no pony was there. There was only a long, dimly lit corridor ahead. Twilight felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Something was watching her. She knew it. As soon as she thought about it, though, she realized the irony. Since when wasn't she being watched in this awful, Celestia-forsaken place? She wasn't in a location as much as she was inside an entity of its own right. After one more quick mental sweep of the room, she picked up her horn between her teeth and limped down through the ominous corridor.